What's up, everybody? This is Jake Wynn, public historian, and I am back here again on my YouTube channel talking about some coal region history. And for this episode, I just wanted to jump into a discussion about one of the more interesting pieces of research that I've done in my time, looking into the history specifically around my home part of Pennsylvania in the vicinity of northern Dauphin County. And it's specifically the events that take place in January, February, and March of 1877 that always captured my interest as a young historian, somebody growing up with a budding interest in local history, specifically in high school. As I started a research project, I stumbled across this story on the front page of the New York Times. And that blew my mind as a kid, looking at the stories of places like Lykens and Wiconisco and Williamstown, places that you may be familiar with if you've read a little bit of what I've written over at winninghistory.com. And this story stuck with me because I didn't think of where I was growing up as a place that would end up on the front page of a major newspaper in New York City. And so this surprised me that people cared and that this story got out there. So what did that story say? Well, it talked about this volcano of a mine fire that took place starting on January 1st, 1877 in Lykens and Wiconisco, Pennsylvania, at the Short Mountain Colliery, that was one of the most important moments in that region's history that is largely forgotten about today. And as I got through college and ultimately starting winninghistory.com and writing about the era's history, I wanted to return to this story. And I did. I wrote a story now just under a decade ago about the Lykens Mine Fire, as it became known, and the impact that it had. And so in this episode, I want to take you through that story and talk to you a little bit about what transpired in the early months of 1877 and the incredibly difficult time it created for the people of those communities in the middle of one of the worst economic downturns in American history in 1877, the worst economic downturn until the Great Depression. And this event, while, like I said, largely forgotten today, had a major impact on the people living there and had impacts that lingered through generations as well. And we'll talk about that. So what I'm going to do is we're going to take apart this story. There's going to be two parts to this video, two parts to this kind of mini series that I'm going to do. Just like I broke up the blog post into two separate parts, I'm going to do that with the video as well. The first is about the event itself, the fire. What happened? How did it start? What was its impact? What were the fire's impact on the mining operation itself? How did they put the fire out? And how long did it take to recover? And we'll talk about the legacies and impacts of that specifically. Then in part two, we're going to explore how the community responded. And that's really interesting. And it gives us a sense of what happens in some of these mining communities in eastern Pennsylvania when there's a major disaster. In this case, thankfully, no one loses their life. Yet, people do lose their lives in the aftermath of this. So we'll talk about what the social impacts of an event like this would be. So that's the plan here. We're going to take a look in this video specifically at what transpires in Wiconisco Township at the Short Mountain Colliery in January, February, and March of 1877. So it's New Year's Day, 1877, and it's a snowy day. And it is a time when the mine workers are actually going to have off. And there's about 800 to 900 workers who are employed at the Short Mountain Colliery in northern Dauphin County, Pennsylvania. It's located in a place called Bear Gap on kind of Short Mountain and Big Lick Mountain. And below the mine are two twin communities, Wiconisco which is adjacent to the mine itself. And then across the Wiconisco Creek is the town of Lykens. Between these two communities, there's about 7,000 to 8,000 people living there in 1877. These towns kind of budded in the Civil War years, in the years leading up to the Civil War and then through the Civil War. They're relatively new communities, and they're built on the mining industry. Really, the towns both are built upon that one industry, anthracite coal mining. The short Mountain Colliery builds those communities. So on New Year's Day, 1877, most of the workers are at home. They're going to be with their families. They're closing out holiday celebrations, and they have off work that day. There's just a small kind of skeleton crew in the mines just to make sure that pumps are functioning, to keep the water out, because they are operating as deep as 1,500 feet below the surface of Bear Gap. And so they're making the steam engines run, keep the pumps going, make sure that all is right. While a worker is inside the Short Mountain Slope, which is a mine that goes down at about a 45-degree angle on the western side of Bear Gap, and he's towards the bottom of the mine, level 6. It's about 1,000 feet below ground, and he is going up a lift to a higher level in the early morning hours of New Year's Day. And subsequently, this worker will tell investigators that he believed that a spark from his open cap lamp dropped below the lift and landed in either some dry wood or some kind of flammable material. And as he goes up and proceeds up the lift, not knowing anything's going on, he leaves, as do most of the other employees, and the mine is left essentially empty. Everybody goes about their New Year's Day, and it's about 2:00 in the afternoon when the Bull engine house, which is the Bull engines were constructed about a decade before, and they were used to pump water out of the mine. Again, these operations are below water level. In fact, there's a creek that runs straight through the middle of this mining operation called Bear Creek. And so there are pumps operating 24/7 to keep these mines dry. And it is at that engine house that employees there running the steam engines notice that smoke has begun to come out of virtually all of the mine entrances that are in Bear Gap. And they know what this means. It means there is a fire somewhere in the mining complex. And at this point, it's probably a pretty big fire for it to be venting out through the surface openings. And so they blow their steam whistle. And that is going to let people know in the afternoon of January 1st, 1877, that things are very, very wrong. And the community in these events, they race to the mine, just as in a mine disaster or a mine accident. We've seen that in popular culture. People go and they race to the mine to see what's going on. And when they get there, they realize the mine workers, their families, they see the smoke pouring out of the Short Mountain Slope. And they know that this is really bad. And so when they arrive, investigators will later realize that the fire had been burning basically unchecked for about 8 hours in the mine and had grown into a vast inferno. Like I mentioned, that New York Times story referring to this volcano of a mine fire. Much of the complex underground is now aflame. All of the wooden props that are holding the roof up, the coal itself that's been left there as pillars, all of this is burning. And this is a disastrous situation for this community. They didn't understand this immediately. And there are some witnesses that are going to leave accounts to us. We have kind of a combination of the investigators later after the fact are going to write about this. And then there are contemporary witnesses, newspaper reporters, correspondents who write to newspapers and give us an idea of what this scene would have looked like. This is what one of them says. Above this tremendous subterranean heat, the earth is cracking and crumbling, falling into immense pits from which dense columns of sulfurous smoke issue. again, giving you an idea. The ground is so hot, the fire is burning so viciously that actually the ground above it is collapsing into it. Get an idea of that symbolism of the of a volcano being what this looks like. Another newspaper reporter described that scene on the first day of the fire, New Year's Day, 1877. This is what they say. Contiguous to this mine and connected with it is an old abandoned slope wherein more or less gas has always existed, which coming into contact with the flames of the first mine has distributed the subterranean fire in every direction, even to the distance of 2 miles, forcing the suspension of operations and driving miners and laborers in horror from their work. The great object of those engaged in combating the flames is to keep them below the water level. And to do this, the waters of Bear Creek, an adjoining stream, have been turned into the mine, but with very little apparent effect. So they are flooding their mining operation, and they know that this is going to be devastating. It's going to take a long time to pump all of that water out, but they are desperate, and they have no other way of stopping this fire other than by pouring water into the mine. And so on this holiday, as it becomes clear just how bad this situation is, you have a general panic setting in among the people of Lykens and Wiconisco. Again, this is 4 years into an economic depression, what's called the Long Depression, that started in 1873, and its impacts are lingering. This is a time of turmoil in eastern Pennsylvania and the coal regions, where the Molly Maguires, the trials have been going on, and ultimately just a few months later, the executions of 10 accused and convicted Molly Maguires will take place in Pottsville and Mock Chunk. And later in 1877, there will be the Great Railroad Strike all across the United States. This is a time of great tension, caused in large part by the want and needs of working class families that are going unmet because of general economic conditions. And that's a situation when this fire breaks out. And so people who are already in rough financial situations in many cases are now going to be in complete panic, because they fear that suddenly this one industry that has built these communities is now not going to be around, at least for several months, if not longer. This is what the reporter described of the atmosphere there in the towns and around Bear Gap on January 1st, 1877. The general impression is among those who understand the topography of these mines that the fire cannot be extinguished, that it must rage until it has exhausted itself for want of fuel. So strong is this conviction among the people of the neighborhood that a panic exists, seizing men in their business transactions and impelling them to the belief that their local interests have been swallowed up by the effects of the fire, which is destroying the mines. As all business there of an individual or general character, merchandising and manufacturing is made dependent on the mining interest. So that gives you an idea of the sense of concern, putting it mildly, about the situation that is taking place in January of 1877 as this fire is taking place and spreading below Bear Gap. On January 2nd, they're going to request a steam fire engine from Harrisburg, from the Paxton steam engine, that is going to be brought in to help in the process of turning the waters of Bear Creek into the mine. And they're going to be pouring water in at a continuous stream. It's extremely cold, so they're dealing with pipes freezing as they're pouring water into the mine. They're going to have to deal with that situation as well, wintry weather conditions. And on January 3rd, they're going to have a major issue when they realize the fire had actually gotten behind them and gotten above the water level. And the fire appears at the engine house of the Bull engine, that pump that was the first place that signaled that there was a disaster just a few days earlier. And that building burns to the ground as a result of the mine fire, poking itself up above ground and actually lighting that building on fire. And there's also the concern, as this fire is clearly spreading below Bear Gap, that there is another mine about 3 miles away called Williamstown Colliery, which at this time was one of the most prosperous mining operations in not only Pennsylvania, but arguably around the world. And that's just 3 miles to the east. And the two mines are interconnected underground. And so you could walk from one mine to the next underground between the two communities. And so fear is that these interconnected mines are going to lead to the fire spreading. Thankfully, that was not the case. It did not spread farther. In fact, there's going to be an operation to rescue the mules from the mines at Bear Gap and from the mines at an adjacent mining operation called Big Lick. They're going to be bringing the mules out, and they actually save all of the mules that were stabled inside the mines themselves and bring them to safety to the Williamstown Colliery. So that's a success. So in this, no people nor animals are going to be lost in the course of this event, which is quite remarkable. But we have a story here from January 6th, so just a little less than a week after the fire starts. It describes how the fire was being fought. And this is an account from a newspaper that describes it. And I think this gives a good visualization for us to imagine what these firefighting operations look like. This is what they say. The fire in the mine is still burning. The Paxton fire engine is working hard. They built a small house with sufficient means to keep the engine warm and from freezing by stoves. The Paxton boys do not altogether like the freezing and disagreeable accommodations. When they arrived here, it was near dark, and notwithstanding the cold and snowy weather, they went to the mine at once. Having no house to put their engine in, they had to go back to Lykens. Then their pipes froze and burst. They are now pumping water down the Lykens Valley slope into an 11-inch pipe from their hose, from which men are playing water on the fire. They have changed the air so as to drive the air all towards the pipes and are following it up. They gained a distance of about 30 or 40 yards yesterday. The slope is down 480 yards from the surface. The fire first started in the bottom of the water course, which is also 480 yards from the surface, from which they pump out the water. All the creeks and water around the place is now being run down the mines, and it all is decided that no more buildings will burn. Breaks in the slope have and will still occur, which must be replaced and will result advantageously to the laborers, who number about 150 to 200 working at times. We had fires here before, and they were put out. So will this fire be extinguished. So they have decided that they are going to put this fire out. And so, like this, for the next 6 weeks, there is an effort to fight this fire, pouring water down the mine, as well as men going in and putting water onto the fire itself. It's going to take until early March of 1877 before the fire is ultimately extinguished, and then recovery efforts are going to begin. And officials are going to put the damages and lost revenue at more than $1 million in 1877 dollars. It's a massive sum of money. And you can see what the economic impact would be for communities that are very dependent on those revenues. And this is going to lead to a lot of harm in the communities adjacent to the mine in the weeks, months, and ultimately years that are going to follow this. So as recovery efforts begin, there is going to be an effort to pump back out all of the water that they poured into the mine to put the fire out. And it's pretty remarkable that some of the records that exist from this, and so we know that they were pumping on and off for 188 days to get the water out between May and November of 1877. And ultimately, they pumped out at least, this is a low estimate because they bring in more pumps later on, this is a low estimate, but at least 280 million gallons of water are going to be pumped out of the Short Mountain Colliery at this time to bring the mine back into working condition. And as the pumps are working and as the water level lowers, repair work is going to begin, giving employment to anywhere from 50 to 150 people going through and shoring up the mine, putting things back in order. And ultimately, after the water is pumped out in November of 1877, operations continue to recover. And in March of 1878, there is going to be a resumption of mining operations at the Short Mountain Colliery. About 14 months after the fire started, it was back in operation. And this damage ultimately is going to do this fire is going to do some really serious damage to this community. Then hundreds of people are going to flee the region looking for work elsewhere. Hunger, starvation are going to haunt the working class homes around Wiconisco and Lykens. And we'll explore that in a future video as well. If you want to read more about the Lykens Mine Fire, a kind of forgotten disaster in coal region history, head on over to winninghistory.com. You can find that in the description below. And let me know what you think about this video. We're going to be doing more content like this, sharing stories that I may have written several years ago and are just bringing them out to a new audience, revealing new research that I've been working on as well. And I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope that you check out the next one. It's going to look at the social impacts of this disaster on the communities of Northern Dauphin County. This has been Jake Wynn, public historian, signing off. We'll see y'all again soon.